Right here we got the Tokina 28-70 f2.6 to f2.8. So this is another very standard zoom lens. A 28-70 or 24-70 is a really common focal length. But of course, this is another vintage lens that's gonna have some special vintage characteristics. This one definitely pushes it to an extreme, even though this is barely classified as a vintage lens. So this was actually produced in the mid-1990s. And this lens has autofocus on some cameras. I wouldn't really recommend using it, but it does technically have autofocus built in. So this lens is really right on the edge of the vintage to modern lens debate, but I would definitely still call this a vintage lens. And this is my favorite standard zoom vintage lens that I own because of just the awesome characteristics and the awesome look it gives you in video. Like I said, this is the Tokina 28-70mm lens. So this is from Tokina, not from, a standard camera manufacturer like Canon or Sony or Nikon, which means you can actually get this in multiple different lens mounts. So I believe you can get this in the Nikon F mount, Canon EF mount, and then I believe a couple other lens mounts that aren't as common, but the Canon EF and Nikon F mount are gonna be the two most common ones that you're gonna find. And mine in particular is the Nikon F mount, but I have it adapted to a Canon mount with just this simple adapter. And so being a 28-70mm lens, this is a very standard but very versatile focal length. Like I said, 24 or 28-70mm lenses are ultra common in, any newer mirrorless cameras, DSLRs, as well as all the older vintage cameras. You can really get anywhere from that somewhat wide 28mm focal length all the way down to, 50 and 70mm to get that portrait stuff. And being an f2.6 to f2.8 aperture, you're gonna get a lot of that background separation as well. So the first thing you notice when you pick this lens up is it is very dense and heavy. This is a very solidly built lens. Very big glass element up front there. And also you can see when you zoom and focus, this is a fully internal zooming and focusing lens. So it's not gonna extend at all when you're focusing and zooming, which makes this a great option for video work, for putting on a gimbal and things like that. And I think this is a great option if you're looking for a vintage lens to record video and cinema work that you want that really extreme vintage characteristic with, a lot of flaring. You want that soft, almost like a black pro mist filter, look straight out of the lens. You're definitely gonna get that with this Tokina 28-70 f2.6. Now, I haven't personally used this much for photography, and I would definitely recommend this more as a video or a cinema lens, but wide open at f2.6, you're gonna get an extremely soft vintage look. And to be honest, at f2.6 wide open in this lens, it's almost too soft. If you're recording in 4K, it just hits that point where it looks really good, like, a good vintage lens, really cinematic, but wide open, it has such low contrast, it lets in so much flaring, and it's so soft that, like I said, it's right on the edge of usable. However, once you stop down to f4, it's gonna add a bunch more contrast, it's gonna get rid of that flaring a little bit, and it really transforms this lens into almost like a totally different lens. And so if you want a lens that you're gonna be able to use for pretty much anything, kind of like the Canon FD 70-210, where it has a little vintage look, but you can still use it for pretty much anything, this really isn't the lens for you. This has very extreme vintage characteristics. And I really just wouldn't recommend this for, standard, like crisp, clean video work. You really want this for, cinematic, for really pushing towards that extreme look, whether it's like a film or a music video or something like that. That's where this lens will really shine. And now also finding this lens is gonna be a little bit tricky. This is a very rare lens. And usually if you look on something like KEH or eBay, there's gonna be, one or two maybe for sale at any given time. The prices also range quite a bit, but that's all kind of for a reason. This lens has a really, really interesting background that I went a lot more in depth on in a video I'll link down in the description. But this does have some connections with legendary cinema lenses, and that's one of the reasons a lot of people, including myself, love using this for video work and stuff like that. But again, check out the other video if you want to see, more in depth on the reasoning why this is such a rare lens and kind of expensive. But for pricing with this lens, you can typically find it for right around $200 to $300 used. But really just depending on what's available, it's really going to vary. The condition will vary, the lens mounts will vary a lot. And again, it's just kind of a tricky lens to find. But if you do find a good clean copy of this for around, $200 to $300, and you want a lens with that extreme vintage characteristic for video work, the Tokina 28-70 f2.6 to f2.8 is an awesome option.